Wednesday the 18th of September 1974, over 2,000 schoolchildren from across Surrey and beyond heard Mother Teresa speak at the Ecumenical Youth Service in Guildford Cathedral, including an interview with Ralph Rolls of the BBC. For many of these children in Surrey, it was the first time they had come into such close contact with the Catholic nun who was becoming well known for her work with the poverty-stricken in Calcutta, India. But for others at the service, this was not their first encounter with Mother Teresa. She had been working with, and inspiring, individuals and communities from the Surrey area even before her first visit to the UK. What could the founder of the Missionaries of Charity have to say to one of the most affluent areas of one of the most developed countries in the world? Her links with Surrey and its communities started with the co-worker movement.
Anne Blakey and Pauline Smith and Pauline Perry had been out in Calcutta and worked in the Missionaries of Charity in Calcutta.
Wow, yeah.
And they've come back with the knowledge, and from there it started. That's when the co-workers started. They weren't called co-workers. I can't remember what we called ourselves, but Mother Teresa didn't like it. I know that, can't think what we called ourselves. Quite right there. We called ourselves a committee, Mother Teresa Committee, and that was too grand for her, much too grand. We're co-workers, and she was one of the co-workers as well, you know.
Faybone's daughter, Susie, remembers her mother's work while out in Calcutta.
The chairman's wife went to coffee mornings and played bridge and mahjong, which initially my mother probably did. But then when she met Mother Teresa, she didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
She went to Mother Teresa. She used to visit the homes for the dying very regularly. So my mother, worked tirelessly with Mother Teresa in India.
Initially, the Surrey co-workers were keen to continue supporting the people of Calcutta by preparing and sending over supplies, such as bandages.
But we sent knitted garments, didn't we? We made dresses and knitted jumpers and things like that we sent from the group here.
But when Mother Teresa first came to visit the UK, the direction of their charity shifted.
When she came to London, she dispensed with all this fundraising and auctions. She said, you look after your family, number one, you look after your neighbour, number two. And that's it.
What she thought of the people sleeping under the arches of London, she was horrified when she got food given to them at night.
So the co-workers began to focus more on reaching out to the poor in their own areas, often coordinating with Mother Teresa's nuns in the Missionaries of Charity in London.
And we did an awful lot of work here for the co-workers. For example, when her sisters came to London, and all the work they do with the poor in London, they used to bring coachloads. Now, when I say coachloads, I mean coachloads. They would normally be about 5 coaches of poor and homeless people that they brought down here to the towers to give them a day out. So they would bring them down here, and I think this must have gone on for 3 or 4 years. They spent the day here, brought them here to the towers. Outside we were on the lawn, and they had lunch, and then we would have music, and they would have a dance on the lawn.
They also offered support to the housebound, with days out to places such as St George's School in Weybridge and St Augustine's Care Home in Addlestone. During this time, Mother Teresa made personal and public visits to the houses, schools and nursing homes of her growing Surrey network.
I think the most exciting thing for me when she came to my house is she brought her laundry with her and asked if I'd put it in my washing machine, which it went in with my boys' rugby gear. Because you had top-loading washing machines, then you could just pop it in at the last minute. And I thought, oh, Mother Teresa's gowns.
How practical.
She had two saris. And that was it. You had to wash one and wear the other one.
St Augustine's Care Home in Addlestone showed their commitment to Mother Teresa's work in the UK when they generously donated an altar and a tabernacle to a Missionaries of Charity home in Southall.
She did come because she was very grateful that we gave them a very nice altar and a very nice tabernacle. And I think she just came to say thank you and to meet us. But all the community, we came to reception and we have a little chat there together, the whole community. And I remember myself asking her, Mother Teresa, you do a wonderful work all around the world. And she told me, you do a wonderful work here, caring, the work of your congregation is wonderful, caring for people with mental illness, and the work you do here is so wonderful. All the work we do for God is so worthwhile, or something like that.
Clearly, this act of generosity had made an impression. In a speech she made at the opening of Addlestone Parish, Joan Osborne, chairman of the co-workers, remembers a conversation she had with Mother Teresa, in which she asked for prayers for the building of the church. She said she would pray for us, and with a big smile she added, "But there is no need. You will get a church. God is never outdone for generosity. You gave him a tabernacle. He will give you a church."
I just remember hardly any people stayed, because nobody actually knew who was coming. It was a surprise. And as I said, the teacher who asked us to stay, well, I can't remember who it was, I'm afraid. She just said there's a surprise visitor. And, at 12 or whatever age I was then, I knew who Mother Teresa was, that she was a very devout person, but I didn't really know her whole story, and it was only afterwards, with hindsight, I realised who we'd met, and how momentous it was, really.
It was at the finishing school that was so grand, it was unbelievable. We were mortified with the food that was there, mortified. We couldn't believe that they would present them. And Mother Teresa said, "Don't worry, God has seen that this is what's being served you. You enjoy it."
Driving home, I was living in Bramley at the pastoral centre at the time, Maryville. I kept on thinking to myself, how can I explain what happened? And then the phrase from the gospel came to mind. Power went out from him. It was the story in the gospel of Jesus. There was a woman there who had a hemorrhage, and she couldn't get to speak to him, but she just touched the hem of his garment. That's the way the scripture describes it in the gospel. The hem of his garment. Power went out from him and she was cured. That's the story. And that was a phrase that kept coming back to me. Power went out from her that night in the Guildford. So my next thought was, wouldn't it be good if I could get her to come to speak to the young people of the diocese of Surrey and Sussex, Arundel and Brighton? And I thought to myself, if that could happen, these young people who are still at school at John the Baptist or Salesians or wherever it might be, that they would be able to look back in their lives, whatever happened to their relationship with God or the church or whatever it might be, they would be able to say, well, at least once we met a real Christian, for whom the gospel really was real and vibrant. So that was my thinking. So I spoke to Michael Bourne, who was my bishop at the time, and I went to see him in Sussex, and I put the proposition to him, could we invite Mother Teresa to speak? and he was enthusiastic. I then, as it were, got on my bike. I went to meet her. I spoke to her and said that I'd come to ask her if she would speak to the young people in Surrey and Sussex. And she joined her hands and she nodded her head and said, "Father, no, thank you, but no." So I said, "Why?" And she said, "My vocation, my work," she said, "is not to be giving talks or lectures, but to be working with the sick and the dying, the poor and the poorest of the poor in Calcutta or wherever. That's God's will for me." End of conversation. But no. I said to her very daringly, not realize she's going to be canonized saint one day. I said to her, "Mother, that gives me a problem regarding the will of God." She joined her hands and said, "Father, you have a problem with the will of God?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What is your problem, Father?" I said, "My problem is this. You've told me what the will of God is in this context, that you're not to come and give lectures or talks." I said, "But the will of God for me is my bishop, and my bishop would like you to come." So I said, "We've got a clash." And I did this to her. And she paused for a moment and bowed her head down as if in prayer. And she looked up and said, "I will come. It is the will of God for me too."
The first thing I remember particularly was Michael Bowen up here, the British Guildford name I've forgotten, up here, and little Mother Teresa down there, walking down the aisle. They were interviewed by one of our parents. Father Dominic Rolls, his father, Ralph Rolls. He interviewed, he worked for the religious department of the BBC. And simply, I think we probably had a hymn at the end, beginning at the end, and perhaps a prayer. And so the whole thing was, it was simply an interview, that's what it was.
And then came the youth event at Guildford Cathedral. I must have taken about 11 girls, I suppose, because I drove the minibus, I know that. And I think we were about halfway. I know that the cathedral was absolutely packed with young people. It was bursting point. And she simply sat there in the sanctuary, the chancel as they call it, and related her story, really. Now, I can't remember if it was from then, but I mean, most of us knew her story already. But, you know, she was a maths teacher, I believe, in India. She was a Loreto nun. And she'd gone, as far as I remember, to a conference in Calcutta and had seen the absolute destitution of some people in Calcutta. And now, I couldn't swear to this, but I think she said on her way home, she heard someone calling for help. And that was the beginning, really. Now, again, I won't put my hand in the fire over this because it's too long ago, but I think it was I who said, when the question time came round, "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't gone back and helped that person?" And she said, "I don't think I would be where I am now." That was the beginning of it.
What do you think her impact was on the young people who were listening?
Well, that's very hard to tell, isn't it? But they certainly were desirous of doing something to help her, you know. And obviously that's what her life has been. To get other people to spend themselves as she did in the love of Christ and spreading it and working to ameliorate the miseries of others.
Impressed could hardly describe the awestruck audience, who sat with hardly a murmur throughout the talk, and then queued to ask questions, both personal and relating to society in general. As two girls from Farnborough Hill Convent, Farnborough, said, "If you listen to it all and only remember half, it has done some good."
And then I spoke to her about myself. I was going through a mini crisis, a mini wobble, not regarding my priesthood itself, but with regard to where I worked. I was working in Surrey and Sussex and I had various jobs for my bishop, private secretary, and whatever. Bit of dog spotty, really, doing all kinds of everything. And I wanted to go to work with some of our priests, either in Peru or in Chile, where we priests at that time. And my Bishop Michael, good friend and a very lovely man, worked very firm when he wanted to be. He said, "No, Barry, I want you to stay here." He said, "It means being away, learning a new language and being away for 5 or 6 years." He said, "I want you to stay." So I kept coming back to him and he kept on saying, "No, I want you to stay." Then I came up and I said to him, "Another proposition, can I go away for 1 year to work with Mother Teresa in Calcutta?" He said, "Barry, I told you, I want you to stay." So that was the scenario. And that's where I was when I met Mother Teresa. So I told her this story. And she said, "Father Barry, you've just given me a lecture on the will of God. It's my turn now," she said, "to give you a lecture on the will of God." She said, "The will of God for you," she said, "is what your bishop wants. He wants you to stay." Finished. And then she went on to say, this is a powerful statement. She said, "Working would be in Calcutta or Yemen or wherever it might be. The work we do," she said, "is very easy compared with the ministry facing you in Surrey, opulent in Surrey and Sussex." Then she described the work, which we're all familiar with. Going into the streets, rescuing the babies, the dying, the aged, and taking them in, bathing them, giving them a bowl of rice, giving them a cuddle, and telling them, and she did this, giving them a cuddle and telling them God loved them, and we too love them, and they die happy. Both are on the way to God. She said, "That's easy." And I said, "Why did you say that's easy?" She said, "Because," she said, "we see Jesus in each one of those, and we know we're ministering to Jesus." And she quoted Jesus and said, "When you did it to one of these least, you did it to me." She said, "That's easy compared with your challenge, your ministry in Surrey and Sussex, among the affluent." And then she said, "Their problems," so it had nothing to do with the poorest of the poor. And she got her finger down here at the bottom of her heart, said, "Your people's problems are there at the bottom of their hearts. And they have to do with sexuality. They have to do with marriage issues, breakdown of marriage and breakdown of family, sadly. They have to do with consumerism, people wanting more and more money and neglecting their homes and their families because they're too busy earning money and things." She said, "Those are the issues," she said, "and they're big issues, and they're there at the bottom of those people's hearts." And she said, "Father Barry, there they will stay at the bottom of their hearts." And then she started jabbing me with her finger, "Until they see in you something of God." And she said, "They won't see anything of God in you unless you're a man of prayer. When they see something of God and God's mercy and compassion, and you're a man of prayer, so then their problems will come out, their issues." And she said, "You will find that you have a real mission in life in Surrey and Sussex." And she pointed her finger again. "You go away, be a man of prayer and a man of God, and that will be your mission and God's will for you."
Clearly, Mother Teresa's words made a lasting impression on those she met.
She saw Christ in everybody, and it comes across. You see Christ in her.
Yeah.
So that's the miracle of her, I think.
Mother Teresa's work was so strong and good and needed that it carried on.
I was very conscious of the things that she said about loneliness and the need to care and much and support to give there, and not to think of the state as taking over all that side of human life.